Coming up, this episode is called The Virtue of Cowardice. I'm going to reveal the bizarre psychology of Republicans who think that they are somehow too good, too morally superior to support Trump. Miranda Devine, author and columnist for the New York Post, joins me. We're going to talk about her new book. It's called The Big Guy. Hey, if you're watching on Rumble or YouTube or listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify, please subscribe to my channel. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Guys, I hope you have gotten your tickets already for the new film, Vindicating Trump, out in theaters nationwide this coming weekend. So the opening night is Friday. Now, you might notice when you look for tickets that you'll see some Thursday evening showings at the theaters, and this is actually normal. Theaters will sometimes sort of almost tease the film by offering a showing or two showings on Thursday night. So if you see that, don't think it's a typo or something is mistaken. It's normal for a film that officially opens on Friday to sometimes have some showings on Thursday. You might be able to be one of the first to see the film on Thursday instead of even Friday. But as I mentioned yesterday, the film isn't opening in a sort of selected way. It's not opening just a few nights. It is opening in a normal fashion. But see it if you can. Opening weekend, you should see multiple showings for each of those days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so there's plenty of room, kind of no reason not to find a spot when you can go and take your family and take your friends. I want to talk today, and probably I did yesterday as well, about some of the themes that are touched upon in various ways in the film and in the accompanying book. The book is the same title, Vindicating Trump. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's also a tab on the website. If you scroll down a little bit on the first page, it allows you to click and pre-order the book. The book comes out early October, but if you order it now, as soon as it's available, it'll be shipped right out to you. All right, let's talk about the GOP. And by the GOP here, I'm talking not so much about the rank and file GOP, although I am talking about some Republicans of that sort. I'm talking about GOP so-called leaders, and I'm talking about the timidity and the just sheer cowardice of the GOP establishment. And I want to sort of title this The Virtue of Cowardice. The Virtue of Cowardice. Why? Because not only does the GOP establishment act in a pathetic and cowardly way, but they try to convert this cowardliness into a virtue in the manner that I want to highlight and describe. Now, let's start with the two assassinations. Have you noticed that there is a relative silence on the part of the GOP about both, not just one? Even when there's a second assassination, you'd think the GOP would be like, enough is enough. You think that there would be Republican congressmen railing and shouting on the floor. The Senate would be in turmoil. Senators would be making public statements, demanding accountability. There's been very little of that. Yeah, an isolated case here and there, but by and large, as a group, as an institution, very little from the GOP. Now, that is disturbing on its own account. Let's go further. The Trump criminal cases. What has the reaction been from the GOP establishment? Silence, for the most part. Again, with a few exceptions that are notable only because they are so unusual. By and large, Republicans decide, we don't want to go there. Let's stay out of that. Yes, they are trying to lock up the nominee of the Republican Party. Think of what that would do. But nevertheless, they're like, it's not our fight. Wow. This is the same GOP that was only, I would say, minimally helpful during the Trump impeachments. And so what I'm getting at is, how do you explain a party that has a lot of an interest in Trump's success and Trump's being elected again? Imagine being a House member. If Trump loses in 2024, we'll probably lose the House. And if you're a House member, that means that you have nothing to do, certainly for the next 2 and maybe the next 4 years. You're just going to be sitting around. So why wouldn't you be on it? Why wouldn't you be very vigilant about striking back at the other side, making your voice heard? How do you explain this very peculiar behavior in which the GOP is either watches with indifference and in some cases actively abets the political targeting and prosecution of Trump and Trump supporters? Now, some people may go, well, Dinesh, what do you mean? How are they actively abetting and supporting? Well, let's just take a single Exhibit A, and that is the recent approval by House members, GOP members, and Senate GOP senators of a new and improved headquarters for the FBI. Tens of millions of dollars. Why on earth would we sign off on this? Isn't it the same FBI that's been targeting not just Trump, but targeting Trump supporters? Isn't it the same FBI showing up at the doors of pro-life activists and then yanking them off to be facing long jail sentences? Is this how you hold these people in check, by giving them more facilities, more money, bigger building, more computers, more opportunities for hiring? What? Now, this problem, which I say is a problem of the GOP leadership, also affects some rank and file Republicans who have been kind of surprisingly mute and lethargic in responding to the left's attack on Trump. I'm not talking about the MAGA Republicans. I'm talking about kind of some of the traditional GOP types. And I want to try to examine what is going on here. I want to answer the question of what accounts for the bizarre disengagement of the GOP. And I want to answer the question by in a kind of a roundabout way, by posing a different question or related question. What gives the left and the Democrats the chutzpah to do what they are doing? And when we come back, I'm going to answer that question. Look at these massive tax hikes being proposed by Harris, an almost 40% top income tax rate, 7% increase to the corporate tax, a capital gains tax on unrealized gains, and that her proposals can add almost $2 trillion to a current $2 trillion deficit. Wow. You might be thinking it's time to make more of your savings tax sheltered and inflation sheltered. Well, this is where the people at Birch Gold Group can help you. Birch Gold can assist you in converting an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. And the best news, you don't pay a penny out of pocket. Just text the word Dinesh to 989898. You'll get a free information kit on gold, no obligation, just information on fortifying your savings before the crazy really hits. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, thousands of happy customers like me and Debbie, you should contact Birch Gold too. Text Dinesh to the number 989898 for your free information kit today. I got a deal for you from Balance of Nature. Hold off on purchasing your first order from Balance of Nature because I've got some information you need to hear. If you go to balanceofnature.com to buy their popular fruits and veggies in a capsule, these are the fruit and veggie supplements, you'll see a discount offer up there. It pops up, it says 20% off, 25% off your first order, something like that. Don't click that. Why? Because if you use my code, you'll get 35% off your first order, plus free shipping. So the special code is the word America. Use that code America and save big. Here's another bonus. Balance of Nature has a risk-free money-back guarantee. So go ahead, find out for yourself what I already know. There's no other product out there like Balance of Nature when it comes to fruit and veggie supplements. When you order online or call them direct, you got to use promo code America. You get the special offer, 35% off and free shipping. Here's the number to call, 800-246-8751. Once again, it's 800-246-8751. Or go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you get 35% off and free shipping. What makes the left think that it can get away with squelching our free speech, restricting our freedom of assembly, charging us with bogus crimes, mobilizing the weaponry of the Justice Department against us, seeking to lock up our party nominee, in general, run roughshod over basic constitutional rights, and really terrorizing many people in the manner of a police state. Now, here's my answer to that question. You can get it in a sense from a line in Julius Caesar, and this is Cassius talking about Caesar. Cassius says, "He would not be a wolf, but that he sees the Romans are but sheep." What does this mean? Caesar becomes so tyrannical because he knows the Romans are weak. They are sheep. They're willing to subject themselves, to be subjected by tyranny. And here's how this applies to our situation. The left and the Democrats, they've been observing the Republicans, and what have they noticed? They've noticed the Republicans are namby-pambies. They've noticed that the Republicans seem to be weak. The Republicans are, we don't really want to fight. We deplore the divisions of our country. We're the party of live and let live. We have good manners. We give our opponents the benefit of the doubt. We want to rise above their underhanded tactics. We refuse to follow suit. We want to stand on high principle. We believe in turning the other cheek. And the left goes, oh, wow. Well, those guys are precisely the type of invertebrate wimps that we were hoping for. They're the party of weakness and of cowardice. So the point I want to make here is that our weakness and even our decency, our self-declared decency, encourages their aggression. They say to themselves, hey, why don't we go and try to stack the court? We may fail, but that's okay, because if the other guys come into power, they won't try to do the same. If they try to do the same, we'd have to worry about it. But they're congenitally wedded to the idea of 9 justices. In the same vein, why don't we censor and stigmatize and ostracize them? They don't have the power to do the same to us, but even if they did, they wouldn't do it. Why don't we deploy the institutions of the state, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, the IRS, the DOJ, the DHS, even the military, against them? We don't have to worry. They would never dream of doing the same to us, even if they had the power and were in a position to do so. In other words, I'm now talking from the point of view of the Democrats, the way they see us. The Democrats think those Republicans don't want to, quote, lower themselves to our standards. At least that's how those idiots see it, which means we can continue to torment them with impunity. Who wouldn't want to take on such losers? The left and the Democrats, this is my argument, are in the position of the schoolyard bully who has complete sway over his terrified victims. And that's my point. The GOP establishment, even some rank-and-file Republicans, they are the terrified ones. They're terrified of the Democrats. They're terrified of the media. They're terrified of being called election deniers. They're terrified of being called insurrectionists. And this seems to be the way that a guy like Mitch McConnell lives. He lives in fear. He thinks if the media targets and assails me, I'll be so badly wounded that my own side will bury me. And therefore, the GOP strategy is, listen, we know the Democrats are the bully, but let's appease the bully. Now, the Republicans know that really bullies can't be appeased. Any appeasement is short-lived. In the end, the bully gets so strong, he doesn't even need your appeasement. So that's when the bully is going to throw you into the ditch, and that's going to be the end of you. But here's the point that's really puzzling. Here comes Trump, and Trump is in his own way a kind of a bully. Now, Trump doesn't bully people who are beneath him, but he is capable of bullying other bullies. And this is quite frankly what makes Trump so effective as a fighter for our side against their side. He's willing and able to take on the bullies, and he even sort of enjoys it at times. He likes to see bullies get their comeuppance. In a certain way, he has qualities that resemble his adversaries. I don't know if you've ever read Shakespeare's Coriolanus, but Coriolanus is easily isolated and detached from his fellow Romans. Why? Because he's a great warrior and they're not. Now, Aufidius, who actually is on the opposing side, of the other army is led by Aufidius. But Coriolanus and Aufidius have a certain kind of kinship. Why? They're both warriors. Even though they're on opposite sides, they recognize each other. They even respect each other. So Trump and the Democrats recognize each other as their foil. This is kind of easy to understand. But what is not easy to understand is why Republicans who can't fight themselves, they're too scared to fight. Why they don't go, you know what? We're so lucky to have a guy like Trump. He's willing to do it. Why don't we just get behind him? Why don't they do that? So here's the answer to that question in my view. I believe that the sad truth is that not only are many of these people cowards, that's bad enough, but they've figured out how to turn cowardliness itself into a virtue. In other words, to the great sin of cowardice, they have added a new sin, self-delusion. They're cowards who think that they are models of character and of rectitude. The philosopher Nietzsche writes about this, and he has a very interesting quote about it. I won't go into the quote, but I'll tell you the meaning of the quote. I have the quote in my book, and it's somewhat long, and it's very insightful. It's written in Nietzsche's kind of aphoristic style. But let me tell you the essence of what he's saying. He's saying that cowards don't like to admit that they are cowardly. They don't like to admit it to other people, but even more, they don't like to admit it to themselves. They don't want to look in the mirror because what are they going to see? A coward. And so what they do is they figure out a way, and it takes a little bit of intellectual ingenuity to do this, but they turn their weakness into an imaginary form of strength. How do you do that? How is that transaction performed? Well, here's how it's performed. If you don't want to fight, you say, I refuse to fight because I am too good to fight. If you're facing a bully and you don't want to fight the bully and you're too scared of the bully, you'll say this. You go, I am too noble to lower myself to take on the bully. I'm better than the bully. The bully's tactics are morally objectionable to me. Even if the bully smashes me in the face, I'm not going to get my friends and gang up on the bully and kick him in the shins. In other words, I refuse on principle to teach the bully the only kind of lesson that would actually convince a bully to stop being a bully. So the point is that for some of these namby-pamby Republicans, they actually know that Trump is willing to deal with the bully in the only manner that bullies recognize. And so what do? They turn around and point their finger at Trump and accuse him of being the worst kind of bully himself. Basically what they say is this: why can't you fight those bullies without using bullying tactics? Why can't you fight virtuously like we do? Well, this is not a serious argument. In fact, as Nietzsche points out, people who say such nonsense, the reason that they say this is just as a way, as a salve, as a kind of balm, as a kind of ointment for their own sick conscience. These are weak and pathetic creatures. They can only live with themselves by convincing themselves that their own groveling nature is indeed the greatest virtue of all. Basically, they're in the mode of the craven deserter. Think of a guy who is in the army, and he's fighting in a cause, and it's a noble cause. He believes in the cause, but he wants to run away from the battlefield. Now, if he were to say, look in the mirror and say, I'm a deserter, I am too cowardly to fight even for the principles I believe in, this would be a terrible thing for him to face. In fact, at some level, you'd have to ask, how can you live with yourself when you take such a position? And so you don't. And so what you do is you rationalize your cowardice. You basically say something like, courage doesn't mean fighting on the battlefield. Courage means running away. I'm not running away because I'm weak. I'm running away because I'm strong. This is, I think, what I would call it, the twisted psychological operation that I think being performed by some people in the GOP. By the way, what I've been doing in the last few minutes is giving you a little bit of a tour through an article I published in the Gateway Pundit. You can read it yourself. It's called What's Up with the GOP. It was published a day or two ago. And it is not a direct, well, it's adapted. It's lifted with some modification from my book, Vindicating Trump. So once again, guys, order the book on the website, vindicatingtrump.com. Make sure you have your tickets for this weekend. You will really enjoy this movie. It is entertaining, it is inspiring, and it is full of information. Once again, MyPillow has been canceled by another box store, so they're passing an incredible offer exclusively to my viewers and listeners. The standard MyPillow retails for $49.98, and for a limited time, you can have one for only $14.98. That's right. Don't miss out on this amazing deal while supplies last. Order now using promo code Dinesh, or you can call 800-876-0227. But that's not all. There's other deals you need to know about. Get a 4-piece towel set for just $25. A brand new mattress topper as low as $69.98. The famous MyPillow bed sheets as low as $25, and so much more. To get these discounts on all the MyPillow products, including the standard size MyPillow, just $14.98. Limited, by the way, to 10 per order. Go to mypillow.com. Don't forget to use the promo code DINESH Dinesh. Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight. It's healthcare done the right way. At ShareRight, you're not just a number, you're part of a caring community. Forget about paying excessive premiums. With ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to health insurance. So think about what you could do with all those savings. But it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. Empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh to learn more. See how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Dinesh. That's shareright.org/Dinesh for healthcare done the right way. Guys, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast our friend Miranda Devine. She is a columnist for the New York Post, but she's also an author. She's a Fox News contributor. She also works in Australian media as a Daily Telegraph columnist, as a Sky News contributor. We're here to talk about her new book, just out. It's called The Big Guy. Great title. You can follow her on X at Miranda Devine, Devine. And Miranda, welcome. Thank you for joining me. And man, there's so much to cover in this topic, and you have been on it from the very beginning. You know, this is a massive scandal, and yet it seems one that has been very sparsely covered in the mainstream media, and in many ways even actively suppressed. So maybe I could start there by asking you, how did we get to a place in the country where you've got a very juicy and salacious scandal that seems to have it all? I mean, it's got sex, it's got drugs, it's got power, it's got money, and one would think that the media would be all over it, and yet they have been, well, I guess you could say all under it or far away from it. Why is that?
Thanks for having me on, Dinesh. Look, I'll give you a one-word answer. Trump. Donald Trump has so deranged most of the media that they have jettisoned all their ethics and values of journalism in order to put their thumb on the scale and, before the 2020 election, ensure that Joe Biden would not be damaged by the revelations that we published 3 weeks before the election that came out of his own son's laptop from hell, as Donald Trump dubbed it. So that was the story. It was, as you say, the most incredible story. As soon as we saw it, I just knew that we had to run it if my editors could possibly find the courage to do so, which they did. And I will tell you that the story, I wasn't the first person at all to be offered the story. I was really the last person. And so there were editors around this country that refused the story for various reasons. So hats off to the New York Post.
Would you say that is because the New York Post has institutionally retained some of that kind of honest journalism that goes right back to its founding? I mean, this is a publication with an amazing history. Does it go back to Alexander Hamilton? In other words, is the New York Post almost alone today in the field of journalism in retaining that kind of ancient ethic?
I would say so. Certainly in mainstream media, there's a lot of online publications that have sprung up. But in terms of an established brand, I mean, the New York Post is the oldest continuously published newspaper in the country, and I think it's the third largest by circulation. And we retain the sort of rigor of journalism of old, and so there was a lot of a pretty severe due diligence applied to this story. When, Rudy Giuliani via his lawyer, Bob Costello, first alerted me to it. And so, and as it turned out, I mean, my brilliant colleagues at the New York Post produced a series of stories that have stood the test of time. There is nothing that has been found to be in error. And it took the New York Times, which supposedly boasts that it has all the news that's fit to print, it took them several months and only after the election to actually acknowledge that the laptop was real and publish a story about it. And even then, they buried it in the sort of 23rd paragraph of a story on the inside. And then, of course, because the New York Times sets the agenda for the world, in newsrooms everywhere. After that, the floodgates opened and the Washington Post, etc., admitted that it was real and started publishing stories from it, because there are such good stories about America's place in the world, about America's relationship with countries that now are at war or are our adversaries, Ukraine and Russia being two that gave millions of dollars to the Biden family. And then China, of course, our greatest adversary, which gave, $15 million or so that we have found to Hunter Biden and his brother and his uncle Jim, Joe Biden's brother.
Miranda, people know about the Hunter Biden laptop, and I think that has given the impression that somehow this is a Hunter Biden wayward son story. And we've had wayward relatives of presidents who have done crazy stuff. I think I remember, didn't Jimmy Carter have a wacky brother? I don't think he was close to as corrupt as this case. But isn't it true? And I think this is why the title of your book is very important. This is a story about the big guy. This is a Joe Biden corruption scandal with the family being the bagmen, but the product was never Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden never had anything to sell other than access to Joe Biden. So isn't this really a Joe Biden story? And what do you think was Joe Biden's role in putting this operation together?
Yes. And in fact, from the very first day, we have concentrated on Joe Biden, because Hunter Biden is a sad case. He's a crack addict and, has had a sort of a miserable life. And his father, Joe Biden, though, enabled all of it, even though he knew that his son was a drug addict and that getting millions of dollars of unaccountable cash would only set him off and make things worse. And Joe Biden was the product that they sold. And he also made himself available deliberately on speakerphone to speak to Hunter Biden's clients at breakfasts at his own vice presidential residence in Washington, at lunches that he dropped into that Hunter Biden was having with, say, his Chinese partners, or dinners that Hunter Biden organized, for instance, at Cafe Milano in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., with one famous dinner was in April of 2014, and that was with Hunter's business partners from Ukraine, from that energy company Burisma that was paying him $1 million a year, but also from Russia, from Kazakhstan. Joe Biden went along to the dinner, sat down, ate and broke bread and spoke to Hunter Biden's business partners. And even if, as Devon Archer tells me, there was no business discussed at these dinners or on these speakerphone calls that Devon Archer attended and listened to, the message was clear that all the message needed to come from the big guy, which was the nickname Joe Biden was given by Hunter and his partners. The only message that the big guy, Joe Biden, had to give to these clients and overseas, shady characters was I'm here at my son's beck and call. Please help him. He had a famous saying, or an internal saying, but it became infamous among Devon Archer and the other partners, that if you do a favor for me, you're my friend. If you do a favor for my son, you are a friend for life. So he really put a lot of stock in anybody doing favors for his son, because of course that money filtered through to the extended Biden family. And I think the Republicans in the House, with all their subpoena access and their ability to look into financial records and subpoena banks, they have uncovered a money trail that does actually include Joe Biden. There are a couple of $250,000 checks written by Jim Biden, Joe's younger brother, shortly after big windfalls from these overseas clients. But on the checks is written loan repayment, and that's the story that the White House has stuck to. So, you know, the Republicans in Congress were never able to really pin that down to Joe Biden using that money for himself. But in any case, this has been a grift that has been long-standing since Joe Biden's earliest days in Delaware. And he and his entire extended family, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, they have all lived a caviar lifestyle, and with no real visible means of enriching themselves other than via this influence peddling business that is the Biden family business. They go to the best Ivy League schools. They live in fabulous mansions in, Delaware or outside Philadelphia, or they travel first class. They dress like Great Gatsby. It's a very, Joe Biden pretends that he's modest Joe and working class Joe and Joe from Scranton and the poorest man in Congress, as he calls himself. And yet he lives in a lavish estate in Delaware. He graduated up from a DuPont mansion. He's always lived large, and it's incredible that no one has really, in his 40 years or 50 years in public life, delved into the source of that wealth. And I think what Hunter Biden's laptop allowed us to see was a glimpse into that money trail. But the big guy, the latest book, is really less about the corruption, because that's a big story. It's as old as Washington itself. It's bipartisan. It's more about the cover-up. It's about these august institutions, the national security institutions, the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, the DOJ, the IRS. These are supposed to keep us safe and orderly. Instead, they interfered with the 2020 election, arguably rigged it to ensure that Joe Biden won.
We'll be right back with Miranda Devine. I'm back with the one and only Miranda Devine. Follow her on X at Miranda Devine. The new book, The Big Guy. Miranda, let's talk about the police agencies of the government, which, as you say, have a mission and a duty, and yet here they are, actively involved in suppressing truthful and vital information not from foreign actors, from the American people in the immediate lead up to the 2020 presidential election. So my first question is, when did this full-scale infiltration of these agencies begin? In other words, if we flash back to the 60s, the left appeared to be violently against the CIA, against the FBI, taking almost an oppositional stance. And even as late as the 1990s, if you had asked me to put institutions that are on the left versus on the right, I would have said academia, the media, Hollywood, left. FBI, CIA, US military, right. But apparently something, either I was wrong or something changed in the last couple of decades. What changed?
Well, I think it's the final piece of the long march through the institutions that Gramsci warned us about, or, didn't warn us about, told us about. And I think during the Obama years, there was a concerted, deliberate change of heart by the Democrats. They told each other, let's not treat these agencies as the enemy. They can be our friends. And of course, if you stack the agencies with lawyers, especially, Ivy League trained lawyers who have been brainwashed in academia, it's going to be a fairly simple matter of doing that. And then, you can mount various operations to get rid of your original loyal patriots, as happened in the FBI, for instance, during COVID, when anybody who objected to the vaccines on religious grounds was drummed out. And then in the military, you're seeing this sort of witch hunt against MAGA supporters, trying to portray them as domestic terrorists. This is a very convenient way of remaking your institutions and stamping out any last items of resistance. So I think it began in the Obama years, but it's been a creeping process. And it was really, I think what Donald Trump did, maybe inadvertently, was he was like this gigantic spotlight on all the wrongdoers, and you just saw the cockroaches scuttling out of the way. And in some senses, the cockroaches had to actually show their faces, as we saw after our story, our first story on the laptop was published in October of 2020. First of all, it was censored by big tech, by then Twitter and Facebook, and specifically because the FBI had pre-bunked it in these meetings that they'd had with those companies before the election. And in fact, in one case, we know from a sworn declaration from Twitter's chief censor, Yoel Roth, in a separate legal matter, he says that in one of these FBI meetings, supposedly about election security, that the FBI talked about a hack and leak operation, warned Twitter to be aware of it and to look out for it, and that it would likely be in October and likely involve Hunter Biden. So, of course, when Twitter and Facebook saw our story on October 14, 2020, they recognized it immediately as what the FBI had been warning them against. And so it took them, a very short time, a matter of a couple of hours, to bring down the censorship hammer on us. And Twitter kept our account locked for 2 weeks until just a couple of days before the election. So that was pretty devastating. But then the old 1-2 punch, a couple of days later, you had this completely dishonest letter, I call it the Dirty 51 letter, written by 51 former intelligence officials, most of them from the CIA, lying about the laptop and saying that it was Russian disinformation, although they used weasel language, which they try to use to get out of trouble now. They say, oh, no, we didn't say it was Russian disinformation. We said it had the earmarks of a Russian information operation, which is exactly the same thing. And the media outfits that they leaked their letter to published exactly that line. They called it Russian disinformation. And none of these 51 former intelligence officials, including 5 former directors or acting directors of the CIA, spoke up and said, oh, no, that's not what we meant. In fact, the opposite. They found out across the media, John Brennan, James Clapper, MSNBC, CNN, and just escalated. They made sure that everybody thought that the laptop, and by implication our stories, were Russian disinformation. And so that killed the story stone dead. And of course, as we now know, That operation was set in train by Antony Blinken, now the Secretary of State, then a senior advisor to Joe Biden. The campaign was panicking about our story. Joe Biden had gone to ground. All they were doing was sending out their spokespeople to lie and say, no, Joe Biden never met with Hunter Biden's Ukrainian business partner in Washington, D.C. when he was vice president in 2014, which was that Cafe Milano dinner I referenced earlier. And so they just lied about it, but they knew that at some point they'd have to address it. So they set in train probably the dirtiest trick ever in American electoral politics, and that was Antony Blinken's Dirty 51 letter. So he called a guy called Morell, who had been the acting director of the CIA, was hoping to be the director of the CIA under a Biden administration. In fact, I presume that had been leaked to the New York Times to make him a useful puppet. And he was more than happy to do the dirty deed when he got a call from Antony Blinken. While neither he nor Blinken have come clean about exactly what was said, Morell has admitted in congressional testimony that he had no thought of getting this letter together until he had the phone call from Blinken, and that Blinken implanted the idea, and also that Blinken, and we knew that because there was the email trace, had sent him an email with the USA Today story, very suspiciously sourced, probably from the same people who signed the letter, saying that, that intelligence people were saying that this laptop was Russian disinformation. And so the scene was set, and Morell got together 50 of his colleagues, and then he got the letter expedited through the approval process with the CIA. So if any former CIA people, and I think 42 of the 51 were CIA, if they want to write a book or have an essay written, they need to clear it with the CIA if it has any bearing on their previous work. And of course, this very much did. And so it did get expedited through that approval process, but in the process, the people who were meant to approve it saw how political it was and thought this needs to be escalated up the chain of command. And so that letter ended up on the desk of Gina Haspel, then the CIA director under Donald Trump. And she green-lighted the letter, even though it was crystal clear to her and everybody in that this was not Russian disinformation, that the FBI, there were several former FBI people on who were signatories, the FBI had in their possession the laptop for over a year. And we now know, thanks to the IRS whistleblowers and also thanks to the court cases, the trials that Hunter Biden has gone through in Delaware and then the guilty plea in California, we know from those indictments that the laptop was a valuable part of the information that was being used by that investigative team, and that it had been inspected by the FBI forensic experts, found to be sound and not any sort of Russian hack and leak operation, and that it was perfectly good to be used in a court of law as evidence.
Miranda, just you laid this out with such kind of staggering, clarity and lucidity that it makes me think, what on earth can be done to hold these people accountable? As you've said, there's been certainly no introspection or self-accountability. They haven't come forward and gone, I had some second thoughts. I really shouldn't have signed that letter. I was carried away with the heat of the campaign or something like that. None of them have said that. Not one of the 51, to my knowledge. If Trump is reelected, and let's say he says, you know what, we need to have some accountability. Is there a way to have any accountability now? Or is it just the case where, you know what, they got away with it and we now know about it and it's good to know, but we can't do anything to the guys who pulled off this scheme, really a nefarious scheme against democracy and against the American people?
Well, I think the simplest and first step, which I'm sure that Donald Trump will take, is to strip these 51 of their security clearances, which will do damage to their incomes because several of them are contractors still for the CIA. So, I mean, that should have been done a long, long time ago. It's outrageous that they are still plying their trade, that they're still being interviewed on television as if they are legitimate people. They are not. They have completely disgraced themselves and disqualified themselves from ever having any access to classified information ever again. And it's frightening that these include 5 former CIA directors or acting directors, including, John Brennan. So he's been at the center of a lot of misdeeds throughout the Obama administration and afterwards. So that would be the least you would do. And I would say, the DOJ is supposed to be independent, and I would say it would be far more independent under a Republican administration than under the Biden administration or Obama administration. But there is just ample evidence there for multiple criminal charges against people in the Biden family and elsewhere. So and a lot of that, the IRS whistleblowers have shown us a lot of that. In fact, entirely their work showed up in the indictment of Hunter Biden in his tax case in California, that he recently pleaded guilty to all those felonies. And that was a pretty voluminous and damning indictment of the entire Biden operation. And I think one of the reasons that Hunter Biden pleaded guilty was even though he had been adamant from the start that he would refuse to even plead guilty to the most minor offense because he knew that he could hold the power of his father over the prosecutors and that they would be frightened. And as they were, his original sweetheart deal last year, his lawyers were threatening that if Hunter went to trial, that his father would show up on the witness stand as a defense witness. And, all of that frightened those very meek and mild prosecutors like U.S. Attorney David Weiss from Delaware turned special counsel. So I think, the whistleblowers were, the IRS investigators turned whistleblowers, Gary Shapley and Joe Ziegler, they were blocked from looking into anything that mentioned Joe Biden or the big guy. They were not allowed to ask witnesses who is the big guy or anything about Joe Biden. The prosecutors forbade that. And they also were blocked from issuing search warrants for a cottage on Joe Biden's Delaware estate where Hunter Biden had been living. When they issued a search warrant for a storage locker where Hunter Biden had a lot of his documents, the prosecutors tipped off Hunter Biden's lawyers. So this was the kind of obstruction that they faced, real perversion of justice from the DOJ, including the fact that US Attorney David Weiss, who Merrick Garland hastily had to turn into a special counsel when the proverbial hit the fan, to protect him and himself, David Weiss allowed the statute of limitations to run out on the most serious charges against Hunter Biden, which included the period 2014-2015 when he was doing business in Ukraine with Burisma, and that time, including that period when Joe Biden was putting pressure on the Ukrainian government, Petro Poroshenko, to fire the prosecutor general in Ukraine, a man called Viktor Shokin, who was at that time investigating Hunter Biden and Devon Archer and Burisma. He was actually investigating Burisma and its corrupt owner, but he had planned to call as a witness Hunter Biden and his best friend in business, his fellow Burisma board member, Devon Archer.
Boy, guys, you get a window here into the kind of detail that makes the case. The book is called The Big Guy. I've been talking to the author, Miranda Devine, columnist and writer for the New York Post. Miranda, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Dinesh.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.